The wagon wheel struck Maeve Cavanaugh's outstretched fingers, crushing them against the muddy street as townspeople scattered like startled crows. She didn't cry out. 3 years of Prairie Bluff's cruelty had taught her that pain only invited more pain. Thunder cracked overhead, and rain hammered down on her broken wheelchair, washing blood from her split knuckles into the brown water pooling around her. Should have stayed inside today, curse-bringer. Henrik Larsson spat from his mercantile doorway, clutching a bottle of patent medicine like a talisman. His youngest boy had died in the Copper Creek mine collapse, and Henrik's grief had curdled into something darker. Storms got teeth today, and you're drawing lightning. Maeve lifted her chin, green eyes blazing with defiant fire. At 25, she'd once been Prairie Bluff's golden daughter, the banker's intended bride, the belle, who could make men forget their own names with a smile. Now her beauty was carved sharp by hunger and hardship. Her dark hair hanging in wet ropes around a face that had learned to wear pride like armor. "Curse follows wherever she goes," muttered Sarah Wickham, pulling her shawl tighter as she watched from the boarding house steps. Mine collapsed right after her accident. Crops failed. Even the railroad changed routes. That's no coincidence. The crowd murmured agreement, but kept their distance close enough to watch her suffer far enough to avoid contamination by whatever darkness they believed she carried. Lightning illuminated their faces, twisted with the peculiar satisfaction of people who'd found someone to blame for their own misfortunes. Maeve pressed her palms against her wheelchair's rims, trying to roll toward shelter. But the left wheel had bent when young Tommy Hartwell, her former fiancé's nephew, had accidentally kicked it during his morning run. She was trapped in the storm's fury displayed like a sacrifice to appease their collective guilt. Thunder rolled across the valley again, closer this time, and Maeve closed her eyes. If she was truly cursed, she thought bitterly, why couldn't the lightning just finish what Prairie Bluff had started? That's when she heard the horse's hooves steady and sure despite the storm. Jesse Rowe guided his grizzled gelding down Main Street, taking in Prairie Bluff, with the weary assessment of a man who'd seen too many dying towns. At 34, he carried himself with the loose-limbed caution of someone who'd learned that trouble often wore a friendly face. His dark coat had seen better years, his boots were held together with determination and leather oil, and his Colt Peacemaker rode his hip like an old companion that had never failed him. The war had ended 13 years ago, but Jesse was still fighting it against memories, against guilt, against the ghost of Marcus Webb, who died at Antietam, while Jesse followed orders instead of conscience. He'd been drifting ever since, taking odd jobs, avoiding conversations about the past, keeping his ghosts close and his connections distant. Prairie Bluff looked like every other frontier settlement, bleeding prosperity into the prairie wind, false-fronted buildings, housing broken dreams, streets muddy with unfulfilled promises. Jesse had planned to rest his horse-buy supplies and move on before anyone started asking questions. Then he saw her. The woman in the broken wheelchair sat in the middle of the street, like an island of stubborn dignity in an ocean of cruelty. Rain plastered her simple brown dress to her thin frame, but her spine remained straight, her chin raised in unconscious defiance. Even from 50 yards away, Jesse could see the fierce intelligence in her eyes and the same unbroken spirit he'd lost somewhere between Bull Run and a deserter's shame. A drunk stumbled past her, hawked and spat at her feet. The woman didn't flinch, just stared him down, until he lurched away, muttering curses about unnatural creatures. Jesse found himself guiding Dust toward the nearest hitching post instead of toward the edge of town. The Dusty Rose Saloon reeked of desperation and rot-gut whiskey. Jesse ordered beer and listened to the locals catalog their grievances: drought, mine collapse, failed crops, the railroad that had promised prosperity and delivered dust. When he mentioned the woman in the street, conversation died like a snuffed candle. "That's Maeve Cavanaugh," said Ben Morrison, a scarred man whose left arm hung useless from the mining accident that had claimed 6 lives. "Was the prettiest girl in 3 counties before her horse threw her. Now she's just what you saw." "Horse threw her," Jesse kept his voice neutral. Saddle slipped during her morning ride. The bartender offered nervous eyes, darting toward the window. His name was Carl, and he'd once courted Maeve himself before she'd gotten engaged to the banker's son. Broke her spine. Sad story, but folks got their own troubles now. Sheriff Brennan, a gray-haired man with the permanent squint of someone who'd compromised too often, leaned against the bar. Word of advice, stranger, don't get tangled in local affairs. That girl's been nothing but bad luck since the day she fell. Bad luck how? Ben Morrison's good hand tightened around his whiskey. Mine collapsed 8 months after her accident. Killed my brother and 5 others. Crops failed that same year. Drought hit harder than anyone could remember. Some folks figure it's coincidence. Others figure different. Carl added quietly. Sarah Wickham says accidents like that don't just happen. Says it was judgment for secret sins, and keeping her around just makes things worse. Jesse drained his beer and stood. Reckon I'll make my own judgment. He bought bread from the mercantile, ignoring Henrik's warning glare, and walked back into the storm. Maeve sat exactly where he'd left her, water streaming from her dark hair, like tears she refused to shed. Miss, he said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. Thought you might be hungry. She looked up with eyes that had been bright green once, before the world had taught them to be hard. I don't need charity. Good, Jesse said. I'm fresh out of pity anyway. He held out the bread. She stared at it for a long moment, then knocked it from his hands. It landed in a puddle-brown wrapper, dissolving. I said I don't need anything from you. Jesse bent down, picked up the bread, and carefully peeled away the wet wrapper. The loaf inside was still dry. He tore off a piece, took a bite to show it was safe, then offered the rest again. Not charity, he said. Just bread. And company if you'll have it. Maeve searched his face for mockery, for the calculating pity she'd learned to expect. She found only patience and something that might have been understanding. Why, she asked. Jesse settled onto a crate beside her, rain dripping from his hat brim. Maybe because I know what it's like to be blamed for things that weren't entirely your fault. For the first time in 3 years, Maeve Cavanaugh found herself genuinely curious about another human being. Jesse stayed through the afternoon, learning Maeve's story piece by careful piece. She'd been Prairie Bluff's golden daughter, engaged to Thomas Hartwell, the banker's son, beloved by everyone, full of dreams about the future stretching endless as the prairie itself. I rode Duchess every morning for 5 years, she said, accepting another piece of bread. Same trail, same pace. She was the gentlest horse you ever saw. Children could climb all over her. She never spooked at thunder or gunshots. My father used to say she was more dog than horse. But something spooked her that morning, something that had never spooked her before. Maeve's voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. She reared like she'd seen a rattler, but there was no snake. The saddle slipped when she went up, girth snapped clean through. Jesse heard something in her tone. You don't think it was an accident? I didn't think about it at the time, too busy trying not to die. But later, when I was laid up with nothing but time to think, I remembered things. How Thomas had been acting strange that week. Nervous. Guilty about something he wouldn't name. You think he... No. Maeve shook her head firmly. Thomas doesn't have the backbone for something like that. But his current wife does. Jesse felt pieces clicking together like bullets sliding into a chamber. Ruthie Wells. Ruthie Hendricks back then. She'd been chasing Thomas for years, but he was promised to me. Everyone knew it, even her. Maeve's hands tightened in her lap. See, Ruthie's got a brother, Elias. He's deputy sheriff now, but 3 years ago he was just a stable hand with a hopeless crush on his sister's best friend. He'd do anything to win Ruthie's approval, including sabotaging a saddle and burying the evidence where nobody would find it. Maeve looked at Jesse directly. They meant to kill me, Jesse. When I survived, they had to manage the situation differently. The rain intensified, and Jesse pulled his coat tighter. How? by making me the villain. When the mine collapsed and people needed someone to blame, Ruthie saw opportunity. Started spreading whispers that my accident was divine judgment, that my presence cursed the town. People were scared, angry, looking for answers. I was perfect, broken, defenseless, abandoned by everyone who'd once claimed to care. Your parents signed guardianship over to the charity board and vanished east. Medical bills, they said, but my father's gambling debts had eaten our savings long before my accident. Thomas lasted 2 weeks after the injury before breaking our engagement, needed a wife who could fulfill her duties, he said. Jesse saw the pattern, now ugly and clear. So the town takes care of you out of Christian duty. The town takes care of me because Ruthie's been embezzling from the charity fund for 3 years. She allocates $50 monthly for my care and skims $40 for herself. I survive on scraps while she profits from my misery, then tells everyone how ungrateful I am for their generosity. How do you know the amounts? I used to keep books for my father. I know how to read ledgers, and I've seen the real receipts. Sarah Wickham leaves them lying around sometimes, forgetful about everything except counting her bribes. The pieces formed a picture so callous, it took Jesse's breath away. They're not just covering up attempted murder. They're profiting from it, every month for 3 years. And if I disappeared tomorrow, the charity money would disappear too, but nobody would question it. Dead people don't need food and medicine. Jesse stood up and began pacing, anger building in his chest like steam in a boiler. That's why they want you gone. Not just to protect their secret, but to protect their income. Not the perfect crime, Maeve said bitterly. Kill the witness and profit from the victim, all while looking like pillars of the community. Not if we expose them. We. Maeve's eyebrows rose. There is no we, Jesse. You can ride out of here tomorrow morning and never think about this place again. I'll be here until the day I die, assuming they let me live that long. Jesse stopped pacing and looked at her. What if I don't want to ride out? Then you're a fool. Been called worse. Despite everything, Maeve almost smiled. I bet you have. They sat in comfortable silence while the storm raged around them. Finally, Jesse spoke again. You mentioned evidence, the saddle. Buried under the oak tree behind the Wells place. Elias told me himself one night when he was drunk, thought it was hilarious that I knew the truth, but could never prove it. Maybe it's time to dig it up. And take it where Sheriff Brennan's in Ruthie's pocket. Elias wears a badge, and the circuit judge owns stock in Thomas's bank. Everyone who matters in this county is either corrupt or doesn't care about a crippled beggar. Jesse was quiet for a long moment, thinking about connections, about debts owed and favors unclaimed. What if we didn't rely on local justice? What do you mean? I mean federal justice. Mail fraud is a federal crime, and if Ruthie's been stealing charity donations that came through the Postal Service, you know someone. Maybe. Had a friend in the war, Tom Brady. Last I heard, he was a U.S. Marshal working out of Denver. If he's still there, and if he'd listened to an old soldier's letter. Maeve stared at him. You'd do that, risk federal involvement for someone you barely know? I'd do it because it's right. And because I should have done something like it 13 years ago. The storm was worsening as evening approached, but neither Jesse nor Maeve wanted to end their conversation. For the first time in years, she had someone who listened without judgment, who believed her story without requiring proof. For the first time since Antietam, Jesse felt like he might be fighting for something worthwhile. There's a place we could go, Maeve said as lightning illuminated the empty street. Old blacksmith's barn on the edge of town. Nobody goes there since Fletcher died. That's trespassing. So is stealing charity money and attempted murder. At least our trespassing won't hurt anyone. Jesse helped her navigate the muddy streets, pushing her broken wheelchair carefully around the deepest puddles. The barn sat like a skeleton against the storm-dark sky, 3 walls, solid roof, half gone, filled with the ghosts of abandoned dreams. Fletcher built this 10 years ago, Maeve explained as Jesse helped her through the gap where a door should have been. died of a heart attack before he could open shop. Nobody's claimed it since. Jesse lit a small fire in a circle of stones using dry wood from Fletcher's abandoned stock. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the space feel almost warm and welcoming. "Tell me about Marcus Webb," Maeve said as Jesse shared jerky from his saddlebags. Jesse was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Marcus was the best man I ever knew. Kind, brave, loyal to a fault. We served together in the 3rd Pennsylvania Infantry, enlisted the same day, trained together, fought side by side for 2 years. He paused, staring into the fire. At Antietam, the retreat order came. Whole regiment was falling back, but Marcus had gone ahead to check on wounded. He got cut off, surrounded. I could see him from the ridge, fighting 3 Confederates with a broken rifle. "What did you do?" I followed orders. Left him there to die rather than risk a court-martial for disobedience. Jesse's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Found his body the next morning. Still clutching that broken rifle, still trying to protect the wounded men he'd gone to save. Maeve studied his profile in the firelight. "That's why you helped me. You're trying to balance the scales." "No," Jesse said. "Some things can't be balanced. But maybe they can be honored. Maybe I can make a different choice this time. Even if it costs you everything, what do I have to lose? I've been running from ghosts for 13 years, taking jobs I don't care about in places I don't want to be. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting." Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie like approaching cavalry. Inside the barn, 2 broken people began planning their war against Prairie Bluff's golden couple. "If we're going to do this," Maeve said, "there's something else you need to know. Ruthie isn't just greedy, she's smart. And she's got the whole town convinced I'm the source of their troubles. Even if we prove she tried to murder me, they might decide I deserved it. Then we make them see the truth." "How?" Jesse smiled grimly. "By hitting her where it hurts most, her reputation and her bank account. They might have had more time to plan if Elias Wells hadn't been drinking at the Dusty Rose, listening to the locals grumble about the stranger who dared show kindness to their designated scapegoat. With each whiskey, the grumbling became anger, and anger became purpose. By closing time, Elias had convinced himself and 6 other men that allowing Jesse and Maeve to hide in Fletcher's barn was tantamount to harboring criminals. As deputy sheriff, it was his duty to roust them out and restore order. The $50 Ruthie had promised him for making the problem disappear permanently was just proper compensation for dangerous work. Jesse heard them coming, drunk men trying to be stealthy, stumbling over their own feet, arguing in loud whispers about who should go first. He shook Maeve awake gently. "Be company," he said, helping her sit up. She listened for a moment, then cursed softly. "That's Elias. He's brought friends." "How many?" 6 or 7 from the sound. All drunk, all stupid, all armed. Jesse checked his Colt and looked around for additional weapons. An old horseshoe, some rusty tools, a coil of rope, not much but better than nothing. "And Jesse Rowe." Elias's voice boomed across the night, slurred with whiskey and false authority. "Come out peaceful, and maybe we'll let you ride away." "What about the lady?" Jesse called back. "She ain't no lady," someone else shouted. "She's the curse that's been killing this town." A rifle shot punched through the barn wall, sending splinters flying. Then another and another. Jesse grabbed Maeve and pulled her behind a pile of old lumber as the shooting intensified. "Burn them out," Elias yelled. Through gaps in the wall, Jesse saw torches arcing through the air onto the roof. The old dry wood caught immediately, filling the barn with smoke and flickering orange light. "We need to move," Jesse said, coughing as smoke thickened. "Where?" Maeve demanded. "They've got us surrounded." Jesse looked desperately around the barn. Front entrance blocked side walls solid, but the back wall had rotted near the ground, leaving gaps between the boards. "There," he said, pointing to the largest gap. "If I can make it wider." He grabbed a rusty crowbar and began prying at the boards. Wood groaned and splintered, but too slowly. Flames were spreading across the roof, and smoke poured down like a waterfall. "Jesse," Maeve said quietly. He looked back and saw her holding an old cavalry saber, its blade still sharp despite years of neglect. Her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes were clear and determined. "If we don't both make it," she said, "I want you to know this was the first time in 3 years I felt like I mattered to someone." "We're both making it," Jesse said fiercely. He put his shoulder to the crowbar and heaved. The boards gave way with a crack lost in the roar of flames. The gap was barely wide enough for a person, and Maeve's wheelchair wouldn't fit. Without hesitation, Jesse lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than expected, all sharp angles and determined will. "My chair," she protested. "Gone, but we're alive." He pushed her through the gap first, then squeezed through himself, just as burning timber crashed down where they'd been hiding. They emerged into the storm's fury, gasping and coughing. Behind them, shouts erupted as the mob discovered their escape. "There they're running." The chase began in earnest. Carrying someone while fleeing armed pursuers in a thunderstorm was the kind of challenge they didn't teach in military training. Every step was treacherous mud, sucked at Jesse's boots. Rain made visibility nearly zero, and Maeve's weight slight as it was threw off his balance on the uneven ground. But Jesse had years of experience running from his past. He knew how to find strength in desperation, how to keep moving when everything hurt, how to turn fear into determination. "Yo Creek," Maeve gasped in his ear, pointing through the rain. "Follow it west, leads toward county line." Jesse changed direction, boots sliding on wet grass. Behind them, he could hear Elias shouting orders, the search party spreading out across the prairie. "Find them," the deputy bellowed. "Can't have gone far." A rifle cracked bullet whining past Jesse's head. Then another shot closer this time. The pursuers were firing blind into the darkness, hoping to get lucky. "'S a gully ahead," Maeve said, and Jesse saw the dark line cutting across their path. He slid down the embankment just as more gunfire erupted above them. The gully provided cover and a clear route away from town. Jesse began following it west toward the mountains that rose like black monuments against the storm-torn sky. "You can put me down," Maeve said after they'd gone maybe half a mile. "You can't walk. I can crawl. You can't carry me all the way to safety." Jesse stopped breathing hard. "How far to the county line?" 5 miles, maybe 6. He looked back toward town. Flames from the barn painted the sky orange, and scattered torchlight showed their pursuers still searching. They had a lead, but not much of one. "All right," he said, lowering Maeve to the rocky ground. "But if they get close, you pick me up and run, I understand." She began pulling herself along the gully bottom with her arms moving with the grim efficiency of someone who'd learned not to quit. It was slow, painful progress, but steady. They made it another mile before Elias found them. The deputy appeared at the gully's rim like a nightmare-given form, uniform-soaked face, twisted with drink and fury. He held his service revolver in one hand, a half-empty whiskey bottle in the other. "End of the trail," he slurred. "Thought you were clever burning down Fletcher's place. But I know every rock and creek in this country." Jesse slowly got to his feet, hand moving toward his gun. "Don't," Elias warned, waggling his pistol. "Keep your hands visible, both of you." "Let her go," Jesse said. "Your fight's with me." Elias laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My fight's with anyone who threatens my family. This cripple's been threatening us for 3 years with her accusations and her stubborn refusal to die quiet." "I'm not threatening anyone," Maeve said. "But you're threatening everything." Elias snarled. "Think we wanted to keep you around? Think we enjoyed watching every move you made, making sure you didn't get friendly with strangers, didn't start talking to the wrong people? You've been like a loaded gun pointed at our heads since that horse threw you." "Because you cut the saddle," Maeve said quietly. Elias's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Prove it. The evidence is still buried where you left it. Under the oak tree behind your place." Cut girth, severed stirrup straps, everything a jury would need to hang you for attempted murder. For a moment, Elias looked genuinely frightened. Then he took a long pull from his bottle. Won't matter after tonight," he said. "Dead people don't testify, and once you're both gone, I'll dig up that saddle and burn it. Problem solved." Jesse tensed, calculating distances and angles, but Elias was too far away and too alert despite the whiskey. "We should have left town when you had the chance, stranger." Elias continued. "Now you're gonna die in a ditch like a rabid dog, and my sister's gonna sleep better knowing her secret's safe." He raised his pistol, aiming at Maeve first. "Ladies first, I always—" The shot, when it came, was deafening in the narrow gully. But it wasn't Elias who fired. Jesse's Colt was smoking in his hand. Elias stood for a moment with surprise on his face, then toppled into the muddy creek water. "Is he dead?" Maeve asked. Jesse waded over to check. The deputy was unconscious, but breathing blood seeping from a shoulder wound. "No. He'll live to stand trial. The others heard that shot. Then we better move." Jesse pulled Elias's limp form onto the bank. Wounded or not, he didn't deserve to drown, and then helped Maeve climb onto his back again. It wasn't dignified, but dignity was a luxury they couldn't afford. The storm was finally weakening as they made their way west through the darkness. Behind them, shouts and running footsteps showed the search party converging on the sound of gunfire. "Abandoned way station ahead," Maeve said through gritted teeth. "Maybe 2 miles. We can rest there." Jesse nodded, saving his breath for the journey. Each step was an effort now, his legs trembling with exhaustion, but he kept moving. They'd come too far to surrender now. The way station was little more than a collapsed shack with 3 walls and no roof, but it offered shelter from the worst of the rain. Jesse lowered Maeve to the ground and collapsed beside her chest, heaving. "We made it," Maeve said wonderingly. "For now. But they'll keep looking, and when Elias wakes up, he'll tell Ruthie everything we know." "Maybe. But we're alive and we have options now." Jesse looked at her curiously. Such as the letter you're going to write to your friend Tom Brady. Tonight. Before Ruthie has time to destroy the evidence. 3 days later, a small wagon train rolled into Prairie Bluff just as the morning sun painted Main Street gold. Leading the procession was Tom Brady, a grizzled U.S. Marshal with sergeant stripes on his blue uniform and the patient eyes of a man who'd seen every variety of human evil. Jesse had written the letter by firelight in the ruined way station, pouring everything he knew about Prairie Bluff's corruption onto paper with the stub of a pencil. Maeve had added her own testimony in careful script documenting 3 years of abuse, embezzlement, and attempted murder. They'd given the letter to a passing merchant heading east, along with Jesse's last silver dollar, and a prayer that Brady would remember their shared service at Gettysburg. Brady had done more than remember. He'd brought 2 deputies and a federal warrant to investigate reports of mail fraud and corruption in Prairie Bluff's charity system. Jesse Rowe. Brady said, dismounting near the mercantile where a crowd was gathering. "Been a long time since Antietam." "Tom?" Jesse stepped forward, supporting Maeve, who sat in a borrowed wheelchair they'd acquired in the county seat. "Thanks for coming. Thank me after we see what we've got here." Brady's eyes swept the crowd, noting the mixture of curiosity and nervousness on their faces. "Now where's this evidence you wrote about?" An hour later, they stood in the Wells family backyard, watching Brady's deputies unearth a rotted leather saddle from beneath the old oak tree. Even after 3 years in the ground, the cuts in the girth and stirrup straps were clearly visible, clean slices that could only have been made with a sharp knife. Ruthie Wells watched from her back porch, face pale but defiant. "That could be any old saddle," she said. "Proves nothing. Maybe not by itself," Brady agreed. "But combined with these..." He held up a stack of documents his men had found in Ruthie's bedroom charity board receipts, showing the real amounts allocated for Maeve's care, alongside forged receipts showing much smaller sums. "There are mail fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder," Brady continued. Federal charges since the charity money came through postal service. You're looking at 20 years minimum. This is ridiculous. Thomas Hartwell protested, emerging from the house where he'd been hiding since the marshals arrived. My wife is a pillar of this community. These accusations are backed by evidence and witness testimony. Brady cut him off, including statements from your brother Elias, who's been very talkative since his arrest. Ruthie's composure finally cracked. Elias always was weak, she said bitterly. The accident was supposed to kill her outright. When she survived, we had to manage the situation. By stealing money meant to keep her alive, by protecting innocent people from a curse that was destroying our town. Ruthie's mask slipped, completely revealing the calculating cruelty beneath. Look around you. Mine collapsed crops, failed railroad moved on. Everything went wrong after she fell, and keeping her here just made it worse. So you decided to profit from her misery. I decided to do what was necessary to protect my family and this community. If that meant taking a few dollars from a charity fund that was wasted on an ungrateful cripple, so be it. The crowd that had gathered to watch began murmuring among themselves. Sarah Wickham stepped forward, her face flushed with shame. Ruthie, she said quietly, you told us the charity board was barely scraping by. You said we could only afford basic care. I told you what you needed to hear. You lied to all of us. Henrik Larson said, his voice thick with realization. We've been treating her like garbage because you convinced us she was bleeding the town dry when all along you were the one stealing. More voices joined in, townspeople beginning to understand how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. Brady watched the crowd's mood shift from curiosity to anger to shame, then gestured to his deputies. Ruthie Wells, Elias Wells, you're under arrest for conspiracy mail fraud and attempted murder. Sheriff Brennan, you're also under arrest for corruption and accepting bribes. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Ruthie looked directly at Maeve for the first time since the marshals had arrived. This won't bring back your legs, she said with cold malice. You'll still be a cripple, still be alone, still be useless. Maeve met her gaze steadily. Maybe, but I'll be free. Can you say the same? 1 month later, Jesse Rowe stood on the porch of a small boarding house in Silver Creek, Colorado, watching the sun set over the Rocky Mountains. The town was larger than Prairie Bluff, more prosperous, filled with miners and railroad workers who judged a person by their actions rather than their circumstances. Jesse, Maeve's voice called from inside. Could you help me with this account book? He smiled and went inside, finding her seated at a desk in the parlor, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. She'd traded her charity donation dress for a practical blue skirt and white blouse, and her hair was pinned up in a neat bun. She looked like what she was, a competent businesswoman running a successful enterprise. The boarding house had been Jesse's idea. Silver Creek was full of transient workers who needed clean rooms and decent meals, and Maeve had a natural talent for organization and numbers. They'd become equal partners in the venture, Jesse handling the physical work of maintenance and cooking, Maeve managing books and dealing with customers from her wheelchair. What's the problem? Jesse asked, looking over her shoulder. No problem. We turned a profit again this month. 3rd month running, we might need to expand. Maeve laughed, the sound bright and genuine. 6 months ago, I was convinced I'd never be anything but a burden. Now you want me to build an empire. Not an empire, just a good business run by good people. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Jesse went to answer it and found Tom Brady on the porch, hat in his hands. Tom, what brings you to Silver Creek? I thought you'd want to hear about the trial, Brady said. Mind if I come in? They gathered in the parlor where Brady delivered news they'd been waiting for. Ruthie Wells had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. Elias had received 10 years for his role in the sabotage and cover-up. Sheriff Brennan and the corrupt charity board members had received shorter sentences in exchange for their cooperation. What about restitution? Maeve asked. Court ordered full repayment of stolen funds plus interest. Comes to nearly $2,000, enough to set you up comfortable for life. Maeve and Jesse exchanged glances. We don't need it, she said finally. Give it to someone who does. Maybe start a real charity fund for Prairie Bluff, one with proper oversight. Brady raised an eyebrow. That's generous, considering what they put you through. Hating them won't fix what they broke, Maeve replied. But maybe helping others will prevent it from happening again. There's something else, Brady said, pulling a letter from his pocket. This came for you yesterday, from Prairie Bluff. Maeve took the letter with trembling hands. The return address showed it was from Dr. Morrison, the town physician. What does it say? Jesse asked. Maeve read silently, then looked up with tears in her eyes. It's an apology. From the town council. They want to make amends, offering to build me a house, provide medical care, establish a real charity fund with proper oversight. Generous of them, Jesse said dryly. They say they want me to come home. Jesse was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? Maeve looked around the parlor, at the well-kept boarding house, at the ledgers, showing their growing success, at the life they'd built together, from nothing but determination and hope. I want to write them back, she said finally. I want to tell them I'm already home. Brady smiled. I'll make sure they get the message. After the marshal left, Jesse and Maeve sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge over the mountains. The air was clean and cool, free from the oppressive weight of old secrets and buried guilt. Do you ever regret it? Maeve asked. Giving up your wandering life to settle down with a woman in a wheelchair. Jesse considered the question seriously. I regret plenty of things. I regret not helping Marcus Webb when he needed me. I regret running from responsibility for 13 years. I regret not arriving in Prairie Bluff sooner, before you suffered as much as you did. He paused, looking at her directly. But settling down with you? That's the best decision I ever made. Even though I'll never walk again. Even though people might always stare. Especially because of that. You've got more courage than most people dream of. You survived 3 years of hell and came out stronger. You built a new life from nothing but will and determination. If anyone's lucky here, it's me. Maeve reached over and took his hand. We're both lucky. We found each other when we needed it most. They sat in comfortable silence, two broken people who had healed each other through the simple act of refusing to surrender. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, carrying other travelers toward their own uncertain destinations. Jesse Rowe had finally stopped running from his past, and Maeve Cavanaugh had finally found a future worth fighting for. Sometimes that's all the rescue anyone needs, not a knight in shining armor, but a friend willing to sit in the storm until it passes, to fight when fighting is needed, and to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. The boarding house prospered, and their partnership deepened into something richer than either had dared hope for. And Prairie Bluff became just another chapter in a story that had found its true beginning. Justice had been served, mercy had been earned, and two people who had lost everything discovered they had everything they needed. In the end, that was more than enough.